Michael Anthony, right?
Yeah, if you'll do Michael Unbroken, that would be very ideal, please.
So that's your chosen last name, or what is up with that? Because this will be on
Yeah,
the podcast, Bite. So give us a story.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, it's if you Google Michael Anthony, you find out about the bass player for Van Halen, and I'm
Oh,
like,
no kidding.
I can't compete with that, man.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not
All right.
yet, not yet. That's correct.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Michael Unbroken sounds good. I like that. We'll go with that.
Thanks, man.
So, Michael, where are you right now? Are you in California? Or?
I'm in Denver, Colorado,
Oh,
actually. So
Denver.
I moved here about 7 months ago. I'm always on a plane, and I got really tired of coast to coast travel. And I said, where can I kind of split the difference? And it was here in Nevada, and I have some good friends here, so I decided to land over here.
I love Colorado. I mean, it's just such a beautiful state, very pristine. I love the fresh air. You're what, a mile high over there? That's why they call it the Mile High City.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it took me a while to adjust to the altitude, but man, once I did, I just ran a marathon a couple weeks ago. It was like great. So,
The training
you
there is
get
amazing.
used to it.
So the travel is for speaking engagements, or what do you travel for?
Yeah, speaking in conferences, connecting with people. I was in New York City speaking at a event last month. I've spoken in Miami, a few different places. So,
Right on.
and the speaking side of thing is starting to grow, which I'm very
Good.
excited about because I love being on stage. It makes me feel very excited.
You're a rare breed, man. If that's true.
Dude, but
Which
I'm an introvert, man, like by nature entirely. And this kind of came through just realizing that the only way you impact people is like you kind of do need to be on stages.
Yeah. That's interesting you say that. I had a conversation just yesterday with someone who was doing an actual book tour, like traveling across the country and going to bookshops and small places and meeting and greeting people in person.
Yeah.
And I'd always resisted that as kind of like not leveraged, but she changed my mind, because the leverage comes even if it's just one interaction that changes the way you see the world. It's difficult to do that, just by Zoom or just always being, the one flapping your gums on a podcast, right?
True.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and
being on
you
stage
think
is similar. You have a whole level of different connection. You meet people before and
exactly.
after, and
Yep.
you make connections. I've made so many different connections at events that you just don't happen if you do a virtual appearance and then you click off and you're gone.
Yeah. And the thing too is like people remember that. Even think about your own journey, the connections you've had, like you remember those moments that really were impactful, right?
Right. Agree. So give us a little sense of your background. I mean, I read up on you and, come across your stuff. It sounds like you had a pretty traumatic childhood, and part of your story is how you overcame that to become unbroken. And it's kind of cool because I'm unbeatable, you're unbroken.
Unbeatable.
So together we're like, what's the word if you combine
Unstoppable.
unstoppable, incomparable?
Yeah. Yeah, man. Growing up, the home was super violent. Mother, drug addict, alcoholic. I mean, do you want me to go into depth with it right now?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
trauma doesn't discriminate,
Yeah, it
right?
does
And I
not.
think it's way more of a problem or an issue than anyone is willing to admit. And there's probably a lot of people here who think they're not, a victim of trauma when they really are.
Yeah.
So let's talk.
I'll create a little bit of just a warning before I get in because it's dark, man.
Yeah.
It's like very dark. Um, I don't think that trauma is a comparison by any stretch of the imagination. But the
It's
only
not normal.
person
Let's put it that way. Normal
it's not,
trauma is like a little kid gets left in the crib, when he's 6 months old and just
yes.
is terrified
Yep.
because he has
And
no sense of reality of what's going on. And that's trauma. But your
yeah,
trauma is different.
and mine is different. And I get compared to Goggins quite frequently. So if that just kind of lays a pathway, I think that's a safe starting space. When I was 4 years old, my mother was a drug addict and alcoholic, and she actually cut off my right index finger.
On purpose?
Yes.
Jesus.
And you think about this, and Mark, that's the response that I get. It's like hurt people,
Oh
and
my God.
healed people. And growing up in Indianapolis, in Indiana, it was a very different world than we live in the 80s.
Mhm.
And She married my stepfather, who was super abusive. I mean, dude, he'd kick the shit out of my brothers and I. He put me in the hospital multiple times.
Wow.
It was the mental, emotional, physical abuse, the getting woken up in the middle of the night, dragged into the kitchen and getting beat for putting away wet dishes. I
Oh my
mean,
God.
that's
Wow.
context, man.
That is context.
And we
That
spent
puts
the
mine to shame. Not that there's any kind of like rank order for trauma, but um,
yeah,
like trauma can have a stacking effect. And the more violent and the more intense it is, and also the more over the duration, then you can claim that it's going to be a little bit more challenging. It's going to have different impact on you, but at the same time, the jury's out on that. You could have one incident that is not remembered, which could negatively impact you for entire life and cause enormous distress, depression, and even suicidal tendencies, if not actual suicide. And you
yeah,
can have your situation where it's so intense and so overt that you're forced to make a decision.
yes.
And that's the thing. I think covert trauma is one of the biggest hidden diseases in our culture. It's the covert, it's the overt stuff that you're like, holy shit, either I go down this path and die, or I get my shit together and figure this out.
Yeah, and part of what I experienced, and you're spot on, part of what I experienced as a kid also was the mental and emotional abuse, right? You're not good enough, nobody loves you. My stepdad would be like, "This is why your real dad's never around, you're a piece of
Oof.
shit." And he would just ingrain those things into me. And
Yeah.
when you understand causation and correlation, which I would later in life, you recognize that we are the sum total of all of our experiences, and you can't run from that as much as you want to. And so by the time we were 8 years old, I mean, we were deeply impoverished, homeless, food stamps, getting bounced around. And between 8 to 12, I lived with over 30 different families, man, just getting
Huh.
popped place to
Wow.
place to place to
Interesting.
place.
Yeah.
And I
And
never
probably none of
knew.
them really stable, right?
No, of course not, because you'd be at one place for 3 days and one day for 4, and then be
Right.
at grandma's for a week, and then be literally in some person's van overnight. Like, it was kinda crazy,
You were like a
and
possession just being passed around, for
and that's
temporary
exactly
custody.
what it was, and that invalidates you. It made me
Right.
feel worthless. It made me feel like I don't matter in the world,
Hmm.
and on top of that, right, I have a learning disability, plus I'm a bedwetter because of obviously, and
Hmm.
all these things are happening and transpiring. Well, by the time that I'm 12, my grandmother adopted me because that summer I'd been living in an abandoned house off of 30th in Georgetown by the Indianapolis Raceway, going to Big Lots on the corner over there, stealing food to survive. And like somehow she found out and she came home. There'd been no electricity, no running water. I'd been in this place for like 6 weeks and she took me. And you'd think that'd be a godsend, and to some extent it was because I finally was out of that environment. My mom had been in a rehab. She just kind of literally disappeared off the face of the earth, didn't tell anyone where she was. And my stepfather and her had had a divorce. So it was just kind of me.
Hmm.
And when my grandmother adopted me, I'm biracial, I'm black and white.
Hmm.
My grandma's an old racist ass white lady from a town in Tennessee you never heard of. Dude, I'm not joking, Mark, we had a
Well,
copy of Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, in our living room.
I'm familiar with that. Oh my gosh! Wow, what an
And so
interesting scenario. I've
so
never.
now it's massive identity crisis, man.
Right.
And I started getting high when I was 12, got high for the first time, started popping pills, started doing all these other different things, got drunk when I was 13, and that's where it started.
Right.
And by the time I was 15, I was expelled from school for selling drugs.
Right.
And I'm breaking into houses, I'm stealing cars, I'm running from the cops, I'm getting shot at, we're hurting people. Like, it's like a movie, man. I'm like,
Yeah.
what is happening in
Grand
my
Theft Auto,
life?
man. Grand Theft Auto,
Well,
right
it
there.
was Grand Theft Survival, dude.
Right.
I was like, what does it take? And that was the environment I grew up in, just trying to survive. And I get a call one
Can I
day.
ask you a question? So,
Of course.
how many others were you with in the same situation? Your running mates,
So many.
and how many of them made it through compared to you? Have you ever able to track that or kind of get a sense for
My
their fate?
my 3 childhood best friends have been murdered, Mark.
Holy shit! Okay, well that answers my question right there.
I One of them got stabbed to death behind a dumpster, one of them got shot in the living room, and the other one I just don't even like to talk about.
Hmm.
And you see this happening, and that's like real life. I mean, I used to, dude, we would just do whatever it took,
Mhm.
right? And we were like this band of brothers, for lack of a better term.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was just trying to figure out how to make it day to day to day because, their parents were beating the shit out of them. They got kicked out or dropped out of high school, and we're just trying to figure out this life thing.
Yeah.
And I got a call one day, the dean of the school wanted to see me, and I'm like, "I don't know why, I'm already kicked out."
Mhm.
And turns out they were gonna put me into a last chance program.
Mm.
And in this last chance program, I would learn skills. I would learn life skills, how to write a resume and a cover letter and to build computers. And this is in the early 2000s, and that was really important. And so
Mhm.
I took heed of that. I decided to go for it.
Mm.
At that time, I actually put a restraining order on my mother.
Wow. How old
And
are you now? Like 16,
I'm
17,
I'm 15 into 16. Yeah.
15? Mm.
And you can see on my report card, I went from straight F's to straight A's,
No way. Wow.
100%. And I ended up being the captain of the wrestling team, and I was dating a cheerleader, and life was very different for a period of
Can I ask
time.
you? Can I pause for a second?
Of
So I don't want
course.
to veer off into this, but too far. But last chance program, was that something that was like a federal program? Was it a state program, or was it like a nonprofit? Like, where did that come from? Who was funding it, and was it
Great question.
something that a lot of people got help from, or was it related to?
So it was actually specific to my high school, which was Northwest High School, which has now been defunded because it was a dropout factory.
Oh,
And it was a nonprofit sponsored by Goodwill Industries, actually.
oh wow.
And
Okay.
so every day we would go to high school and we, dude, this is weird because like kids are wearing jeans and t-shirts and stuff, and we had to show up in khakis and polos,
No
right?
way.
So they started training that into us. And we got on this other bus. We went to a literal Goodwill, and in the back where they had like these classroom settings created for us, we would learn. We would do mock interviews with each other and go through the whole thing. It was a
Mhm.
phenomenal experience. It actually set the precedent for what my life would come on a long enough timeline.
Yeah, I mean, just the to pin that point, like it just seems like such an obvious, beneficial, and powerful way to really help the lost souls at a very young age. And I'm wondering why there's not like a with all the billions and trillions of dollars that we spend on social programs, why this isn't like a federally funded obvious thing that we do across the board.
Yeah, and most of those kids, after we graduated, they went on and they got jobs. They weren't in the streets. So most of those kids didn't go to prison, right? It's incredible. Sometimes we'll connect. A lot of them joined the military, which was
Yeah.
kind of my path too. Like the one thing I always wanted to do was be a Marine Corps scout sniper.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually destroyed my knee my senior year. And
Mm-hmm.
even though I rocked the ASVAB, they were like, dude, we're not letting you in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was heartbreaking, Mark,
Yeah,
because I
sorry to
only
hear that. That you probably would have been a great sniper.
I only had 2 dreams as a kid, man.
Mm-hmm.
Don't die, become a scout sniper.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And I blame Tom Berenger for that, by the way.
Mm.
That
Funny you should
um
say that because that's the image that popped in my mind of Platoon. When you said that, I said, I bet you he watched Platoon, and that was where that got
it was
planted.
all the military movies. It was
Yeah,
that, Top Gun, you
right,
name it, man. I was buried in that mentality because it to me it felt like freedom. And as a
right,
freshman, I was in JROTC for the
right.
Navy, and it was my path. And
Mm-hmm.
so I ended up not graduating high school because my mom, who got out of rehab, came to live with us again.
Oh, good Lord.
And within a month, she was back to drinking and popping pills, crashing cars. And again, on my report card, you can watch from straight A's to straight F's.
Good Lord.
And my girlfriend calls me one day and she's like, "You're not graduating." And I was like, fuck. And it was incredibly embarrassing because I had to go to school and I had to confront this. And I stood across from my teacher, Mr. Bush, who told me the most important thing anyone's ever told me. He said, if you want to get by in life, you have to work for it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't get by in your charms and your good looks. And he made me go to summer school. And this really weird thing happened in summer school where the teacher just handed me the diploma. He goes, "We're
Hmm.
done with you. Get out."
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh, well, this is the opposite of everything I just experienced."
Right.
And so I go get this job. I'm working a warehouse, and you can just see the desperation in people's eyes. Like, it's where dreams go to die. And I was
Hmm.
putting microchips in motherboards for 12 hours a day on this assembly line.
Mm.
And they fired me. And I'm sitting in the car
Because
and I'm
why?
like,
Because you weren't doing it fast
"Oh,
enough. You
oh
were
no, because I was stoned."
okay. Well, why not? Of course, right? I'd probably be stoned if I was putting microchips and motherboards all
It
day
was
long.
it was the only way I could survive. And so so I'm sitting in my car, I'm like, "Look at your life, man." This was my first rock bottom. "Look
Hmm.
at your life. You are a loser. You just got fired from a dead-end job. You have no money. What are you doing?" And I was like, "What is the solution for poverty, for homelessness, for abuse?" And I was like, "Oh, it's money, right? It's gotta be." And so I made a declaration. I said, "I want to make $100,000 a year legally by the time I'm 21." I've been in handcuffs multiple times. I have family in prison for life. I talked to you about my three best friends. And it was just like, if I can figure this out, everything will be different.
Let me ask you a
S-
question here just about how your mind works or how the mind works. So, you know, you've got all this trauma. You obviously your thinking processes are leading to bad outcomes. And so what was that like in that moment, or what caused you to like have this separation and this, what I now call metacognitive ability to think about your thinking and say, you know what, that thinking, is not leading to the good results. And so therefore I can think differently. Because some people never really come upon that. They just think, well, I am these thoughts, I am these behaviors, I am this identity, and that's what you get.
I'm a survivor, man. I'm a warrior. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just have this massive resiliency in me that sometimes, unfortunately, like a lot of people, only comes via the rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And as I sat there, it was just it was the first time I realized I was tired of myself. I was done with my own bullshit, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
like, take action, do
Yeah, that
something.
that story doesn't work anymore for you, and whoever the you was, you didn't identify as that story anymore.
And I didn't have the words for it then,
Yep.
being a kid. The only
Right.
thing I knew is like this wasn't the track. Like I
Mm-hmm.
knew that if I didn't shift something, one of the things that happened, and I don't actually talk about this a lot, but this sparked this memory as we're chatting. We used to go visit my uncle at Pendleton Prison like 3 to 4 times a month.
That's a whole different Camp Pendleton than where you would have worked as a Marine Corps.
Very much so.
Wow.
And you would just sit there and I'd look at him, and every single day it was reinforced, don't ever be this.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on my way there. And I
Mm-hmm.
just truly was. And I was just like, I'm gonna end up dead or in jail. My dream got stripped of me. I did not know what to do after not being able to be a sniper.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what to do. And so I said, all right, the path is $100,000 legally.
Mm-hmm.
And I land a job at 18 and a half working for a fast food joint. And I get into a leadership role, general manager in training. And I got a team of 52 people under me at
What
18 and a
was the
half.
company? What was the company?
It was a Wendy's.
Wendy's. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Those
we
are
were just,
great paths to learning business management, leadership skills. I'm a big fan of those franchises that hire minimum wage people off the street and teach them.
yeah, I
Teach them
learned.
how to basically basic skills. It's phenomenal. And we have fewer and fewer of those opportunities, and they're going to all be outsourced to robots someday or automation. It's unfortunate. Like, what are the kids that need that kind of opportunity going to do? It's going to be an interesting
Yeah,
thing.
and I
Social.
did need that opportunity, and like, look, context, like they were totally throwing me to the wolves
Of
because they
course.
put me in the busiest store in the entire city, where we were doing $1 million in burgers and fries, man. Like it was chaos, and I knew it wasn't the path. Like I just knew that this wasn't going to be the thing that led me to that marker, 100,000, and I ended up after really 2 years of constant rejection of trying to work for a corporation, of resumes and interviews and the stuff going nowhere, hundreds of no's. I actually ended up landing a job with a Fortune 10 company.
Hmm. Nice.
And this is, again, no high school diploma, no college education. And I hit my goal. I started making six figures.
Hmm.
And then my life turned into a
What was that
complete
job?
disaster.
Let me
I
tell.
was doing insurance sales.
Oh,
Just
insurance. Okay.
this is pre-Obamacare, and I was helping people get medical insurance. I was licensed in 48 states. I was
Hmm.
a broker, and I was building a book of business. And I mean, I had this moment recently. I was like, did I make this up? Did I really make $100,000 when I was like 20 years old? And when I pulled up my old W-2, and it's a little bit of a stretch, but I made $96,000. And what happened was, like what happens with a lot of people, money kind of brings out your truth.
Hmm.
And by the time that I was 25, I was 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs a day, drinking myself to sleep, high from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, cheating on my girlfriend, and I was $40,000 in debt.
Wow.
I was everything everyone told me I was going to be.
Hmm.
And I
But you
woke
weren't
up,
in jail or dead, so you had that going for you.
I wasn't that far away though.
Hmm.
Especially with the health choices and the lifestyle choices and the food and drugs I was putting into my body, the late nights, the fifths of,
Hmm.
Captain Morgan on Fridays.
Oof.
Like, it was chaos, man. Yeah, exactly. That's my
Painful.
response to it too. And I woke up this one particular Saturday after arguably the worst night of my life, and I'd put a gun in my mouth. I
Hmm.
was done, man. I was done, like, just feeling alone in the world, feeling like nobody gets it. Money was supposed to solve all these problems, and it didn't.
Hmm.
And I'm laying in bed. Keep in mind, I'm 350 pounds. I'm
Yes.
smoking a joint, eating chocolate cake, and I'm watching the CrossFit games, man.
And you
and
got a gun by your side
and
in your
if
hand, or yeah. Holy
that's not
shit!
rock bottom, I don't know what is. I
Wow.
really truly don't. And when I pulled myself up and I went to the bathroom, I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I remember being 8 years old, and the water company had come and turned our water off. And it's like a blistering hot Indiana August summer day.
Hmm.
And, they're always turning off our water, our heat, electricity. I mean, this is just normal to me. But this one particular day, my mom is like begging this guy not to turn off the water, and he's just doing his job. And I go to the backyard, I grab this little blue bucket, I walk across the street to our neighbor's house. I turn on their spigot on the side of their house. And for the first time, I stole water.
Wow.
And I was like, when I'm a grown up, this will not be my life.
Hmm.
And it wasn't in a lot of ways, but in so many ways, I was still that hurt, lost little boy. And as I looked in that mirror, I asked myself a question that literally changed my life forever. I said, what are you willing to do to have the life that you want to have?
Hmm.
And the answer was no excuses, just results.
Hmm.
And what that meant is I was no longer going to play the victim. I was no longer going to fucking blame other people for my decisions. And I was no longer going to negotiate with myself.
Hmm.
And 12 years later, I'm talking to you.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, what was you know? Let's say someone is listening to this and they just haul themselves out of bed and go and look themselves in the mirror and they have that same conversation, and then they're going to say, "Okay, Michael, what did you do next?
Yeah.
What was the very next thing you did after that conversation?"
Literally in that moment, it was, I took those cigarettes and I threw them away.
Okay,
That
that's a
was step
positive act.
one.
Yeah.
That was step one. And it was about, I realized something in that moment that I would start to transpire again and again and again in my life, and also things that I teach people when I coach them and things I talk about, is at that moment, at that juncture, you have to give yourself an intense amount of grace.
Hmm.
What people don't understand, and this is just my truth about childhood trauma and abuse,
Hmm.
like, dude, it's not this finger that was cut off and all the surgeries and the cuts and the burns and getting my head slammed into walls. Like, it's not that stuff that I carried with me. It was the theft of identity.
Mm-hmm.
Every time that these things happened, my brain made meaning of those experiences. And it said, you're in danger. So don't be you.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn to placate, you learn to become a chameleon. And the worst part about that is that serves you for a period of time because it keeps you safe when you're 8, when you're 12, when you're 18.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is you realize like this no longer serves me to not own my truth, to not be the person I'm capable of being, to not love myself and be compassionate and have empathy and grace and show up and have accountability and do the damn things I said I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that space that I want people to hold on to when they start this journey is to recognize that what they're about to do, they've never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to fail a lot. And the 4 years after that moment was a consummate battle. Like I would take a step forward and 8 million steps backwards because I promise you, I threw those damn cigarettes away about 200 more times.
Right.
Right? I
Right.
threw the bottle away more and went to the gym and the whole thing. And it really just started with that
Right.
declaration of recognizing that you can be your excuses. And you're more than welcome to be. Most people, you have all the right in the world to be the victim. I will never strip that. I will never take that away from anyone ever. But you have to make a fucking
But if you
decision.
want to transform, you can't play the victim. That has to be a past identity. You have to transform out of that identity to something else. You can still be proud, or not proud, but you can still claim it, but you can't
Yes,
live it anymore if you want to be healthy and whole.
exactly. And
The other
and
thing that really pops out to me there is you recognize early on that just the decision, in the matrix, of reality, that decision is everything, right? And if our minds were powerful enough, you probably could transform, in a week or two or a month or even a year. But the reality is, most of us don't have that kind of mental power, and we have to build it slowly and slowly over time. And
yes.
it's just through making, this decision, like you said, over and over and over. So make that same decision to come back to that intentionality when you slip and say, you know what? No, these cigarettes are going away again and again and again until they go away for the last time. Same thing
Yeah.
with the drink. Same thing with the decision not to go to the gym. You just reverse that again and again and again until going to the gym is as normal as waking up.
Yes.
And then
And
suddenly, for your case, 13 years later or 10 years later or whatever it was, probably more like 5 or 6 years later, you're super healthy and like looking back and going, wow, look what I've done.
yeah, people drastically underestimate what they can do in a decade.
That's right.
And in the beginning I would beat myself up all the time about it because
I
I
think it was
could.
James Clear. I think recently I read an article or something. He said people drastically overestimate what they can do in 5 years, or underestimate what they can do in 5 years, and drastically overestimate what they can do in 1 year.
Yeah.
Something
And
like that. And I think that's so true, right? Yeah.
it is. And it's patience, right? And it's the willingness to call heed to the signs when they're in front of you. And it says, this is how you can be special. This is how you can be the hero of your own story. This is the thing that you need. And for me, it became very much about leveraging what was in front of you. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, and it was like they weren't really podcasts yet, but they were like YouTube videos where it was like
Mm-hmm.
a guy like Mark Devine on Inside Quest with Tom Bilyeu.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit there and I would consume it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would find these books and I would consume them. And I would go to conferences and events. And I would just keep bringing it in, bringing it in, bringing it in. Because the one thing that I knew to be true was like, if other people could do it, I could do it too.
Right.
And I think people underestimate how important community and mentorship is, even if you're not directly connected to that person,
Sure.
right? I mean, you've been influenced in my life for a very long time. We just met, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was because someone made a decision to sit down and have a conversation with you where I started thinking about things like Zen and martial arts and breathing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that holds true for whatever arena you're willing to step into. And you have to be very cautious as well as making sure you're not inputting the wrong information.
Right.
Because, see, I'd always been goal driven. I just was driven towards the wrong goals.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's a very practical view of this, which is, you've got to learn. You got to learn from people who are doing things in a way that you perceive to be in alignment with your goals, which then will teach you how to replace and retrain yourself, out of the behaviors that have led you to where you now perceive as to be not a good place. So that's habituation and learning. The other way to look at it is, this kind of theory that I have that essentially our minds create everything. It even creates the our physical manifestation in this world. And your mind is like a stream. It's a river, right? And it can be a tiny little trickle. And you see people whose minds are a little trickle. There's not a whole lot there. And then you see people whose minds are like a freaking torrential rapid, with just all sorts of eddies and rocks and danger. And those are the chaotic. That was you for a while. And you see people whose minds are like, the depths of the ocean, just completely pure, clear, deep, undisturbed, and powerful. And so, left to its own devices, your mind is trained by your environment until you wake up and you recognize that you have the capacity to train it, which is what you did when you looked in the mirror. And then you take responsibility for training that. And it's like shaping the banks of the river, of your mind. And then also determining what kind of quality of water you're going to allow into that river. Right. And so the water is in the content and the ideas and the people. And so it's almost like you dam up the old shitty water that was coming into the river of your mind, which is the negative people, network news, negative thinking, and also memories that you are obsessing about who you are and what you are, and that's the old false identity. And then you create a pathway to filling it up with new, fresh water, clear thinking, new ideas, new beliefs, new people. And within a short order of time, you've completely rerouted and transformed the river of your mind, which then transforms your body, transforms your relationships, transforms the entire directionality of your life. That's kind of a metaphorical way of looking at it, but I think it's a powerful metaphor.
I love so much that you use the word create,
Mm-hmm.
because I think the greatest thing that I understood was the ability to bring to fruition the dreams that I had,
Sure.
to create them, to
Yeah.
create my body, my mind, my environment. A lot of that came through visualization, a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
came through meditation,
Mm-hmm.
but without having the clarity of those two things combined
Mm-hmm.
with action,
Mm-hmm.
nothing would have been different.
Yeah.
And the more action I took, here's what was really interesting. At 27 years old, I realized I had zero confidence. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't believe in myself in any capacity because I
That's because you
was,
were living a false story,
yes.
right?
And
And
I was allowing,
the belief was built on that identity. When you step away from
exactly.
that story, then you're facing the unknown, and so that's fearful, and so you lack confidence. So
Yes.
until you step into the unknown and start building the new structures of the new identity, you're going to have that lack of confidence. But that's also the beauty of it. It's the beauty. This is how, one of the great secrets to living an extraordinary life, a creative life, is to be comfortable with that unknown, to be always stepping into unknown territory and to not fear it, or to turn the fear into excitement and anticipation and just a pure creative force, which is the mind, the ability to just absolutely create whatever you want in alignment with what your, calling or dreams are,
Yeah.
from your higher self.
And
That's
it
cool.
was creating values in my life,
Mm-hmm.
deciding what words represented me, understanding the power of words,
Mm-hmm.
leveraging those words as a filter for the decisions that I was making, honesty,
Mm-hmm.
kindness, leadership, self actualization, and thinking about everything that I did in my life, filtering through those words
Mm-hmm.
to help me determine if I was making the right or wrong decisions for myself.
That's awesome.
And and the more that I did that, the more I actually started to pay attention to the environment around me and realized that so many times it was a collision of values with other human beings that was
Mm-hmm.
in my way.
Mm-hmm.
And more so, I would allow, because it felt necessary to placate so that I had companionship and friendship, I would allow myself to break my own values for significance. And when I understood that, everything changed. And one of the really hard parts about this journey that that I don't envy that people have to go through, but I'm sure you will understand this, is that as you grow and you change, there are people who are not going to like it,
Hmm.
who are going to want you to be the version of you that you used to be.
Right.
And
Because they're
as
using you in some way, or they get benefit for you to stay that way. It helps their psyche
it
to see
does,
you suffer. Yeah.
it does, and that's one of the really unfortunate truths about life, and that could be
Right.
your own parents,
Right.
your best friends, your wife.
Hmm.
And you have to be willing to stick to your guns and say, this is who I am and this is my path, because that's ownership and that's agency. And that's the greatest sense of healing in this journey, Mark. As I look at myself in the mirror today, man, and I'm okay with the reflection.
Yeah. I love that. I just want to double click for a second on what you said there a moment ago. Because, there's three ways to live: dependent, independent, or four ways: dependent, independent, codependent, or mutually, interdependent. Obviously, the fourth one is the healthiest, right? That's what we're seeking, which is meaning that you have your autonomy and freedom, but you can collaborate in a mutually interdependent way to, because we can rely on other people. This is great teamwork, right? And you can look at your family and your parents as part of that team if they're healthy and interdependent. Otherwise, and what so often happens, especially if you grow up in a dysfunctional environment, dysfunctional family, is you end up in a codependent or a dependent relationship. Like a woman being dependent upon her husband, or like in my mom and dad's case, my father's completely dependent upon my mom. You know what I mean? He'd probably die within a month if she didn't have her to cook for him, or he would find someone else to cook for him, or to bring him food, or you know what I mean, whatever. Like he's just completely incompetent in that arena. Um, so he's dependent, and I was codependent because of for a long time because of the way that I was brought up. And codependence is just rampant in our culture. And codependence is unhealthy because you give up your autonomy and to someone else, and they give up some of their autonomy to you, and you think it's, oh yeah, and you kind of fit together sometimes like a hand in the glove and it works, or sometimes it's more like this. More often it's like push pull, push pull, push pull. But it's still unhealthy, and it absorbs an enormous amount of energy, and it's all negative, even if you don't recognize it, because you've given up a lot of your autonomy. In fact, you could also say that we have individually and culturally a codependent relationship with the government or the church, because they've basically inserted themselves and said, you need me. You need to be dependent upon me. And so you give up a lot of your autonomy to them. And then you can't live free, wholly free, entirely free when you do that. Now you can live in society and take, uh, enjoy the benefits that government offers, such as, policing and clean roads and stuff like that. I think some of the things we take for granted in our country, and all you got to do is go to Egypt or Syria or somewhere else to realize, wow, those aren't normal around the world, right? You can enjoy the benefits in an interdependent relationship, you know, with a little bit of wisdom and work, which you've done, right? And I
And
don't know why I just wanted to kind of talk through that because I think it's something that I haven't thought a lot about, but we are a culture of codependence, and that means if you are in that manner where you've given up your autonomy to a government or to a church and you're not thinking clearly for yourself, or to, and some people will be like, what are you talking about? I love my church. I'm like, great. You should, right? But be free of the dogma and the doctrine to explore other ideas and explore your own spirituality and find God within, because it's there, right? Whatever your concept of God is, we emanate from that. And that's, to me, people could say, well, that's a belief. And I was like, no, that's reality. That's lived reality, right? So live the reality to prove it to yourself. At any rate, I went down a little rabbit hole there. Sorry about that.
yeah, but I think you're spot on, because the greatest sense of freedom again is about autonomy,
Right.
is your willingness to stand on your own 2 feet and say, this is who I am, despite the criticism, despite cancel culture, despite whatever it is that's in front of you that says no.
Right.
And growing up, it's really fascinating when you really dive into causation and correlation, because you look at these experiences of youth. Right now, you could have my case where it's overt and covert trauma. It's really right there. You can't run from it. But then you're like in third grade and you're coloring the house and you make the sun purple, and Miss Smith comes up to you and she chastises you in maybe a gentle way, right, in front of the
Mm-hmm.
entire class. And what happens is suddenly your brain goes, wait a second. I thought it was okay to make the moon purple, but
Hmm.
everyone laughed at me. And your reptilian brain goes, well, I'm going to get ostracized from the community, and that's dangerous.
Hmm.
And so now, instead of showing up, creating your art, maybe standing on stages or having a podcast or whatever it is that brings you joy, the fear of criticism is so deep in you because of that one experience. And it could be something so small that in passing, and Miss Smith will never remember that that happened, but it
Hmm.
is embedded in your psyche for life. And until you can step through and understand and acknowledge how you got to where you are, you're never going to be able to get to where you want to go. And I
Right.
spent so much of my life stuffing it down, hiding from it, running from it. But it's there, and the darkness will always catch up with you. But what's
Hmm.
really, really beautiful is like, think about a new day, right? It starts in the dark,
Hmm.
and then eventually there's light. But if you're unwilling to acknowledge that, then you're ever going to be forever going to be trapped.
Yeah.
And that to me is so dangerous because it leads down this path of regret.
Hmm.
And my greatest fear in life is dying with regret, a life
Hmm.
unlived. And I think to myself every single day, like, how do you just show up? It's hard, it's difficult, it's grimy, it's ugly, it's painful. Life is suffering sometimes. Sometimes, man, it's fucking beautiful and it's
Hmm.
amazing. And you get to connect with incredible human beings. And if you're willing to look for that light, even if it's just a small glimmer and the tunnel feels like it's insurmountable, but you take a step towards that light every single day, I
Hmm.
promise you, on a long enough timeline, you will stand in it.
You will, and you will have no regrets, and that's a great driving principle. To be at the end and not have any regrets. And so, what does that mean? You don't wait until the end and then try to eradicate those regrets. You do it right now. Right. Start working on eradicating regrets, and then once you do that, then you work on not accumulating regrets. It's almost the same in the spiritual sense of burning off old karma and then learning how to not to accumulate any more negative karma. And then you live in that true freedom. And I think, kind of back to what we were talking about a moment ago, the human spirit is driven toward freedom, right? Driven toward full expression of its creative force and creative energy and dharma or calling. And anything that stands in the way is a limiting, it's a contraction, right? So being in a codependent relationship, even by worrying about what other people think, then you're basically outsourcing your self-esteem to others. I came across a quote this morning from Lao Tzu, right, the author of Tao Te Ching. Care about what other people think, and you'll always be their prisoner.
Mm.
And we, especially influencers like us or others, everybody, they're all worried about in social media. You're all worried about what everyone thinks about them, and therefore they're prisoners to other people's opinions, and that contracts them and takes them away from their full autonomy and freedom. And so they're not going to feel the full creative expression and joy, and they're going to have regrets. So don't do that, right?
Yeah, and especially not on social. I mean, you've been on social as long as I have. Like, I'm sure you've been canceled. I've been canceled. Not going to stop
Oh
me.
yeah,
You're not
yeah,
going to stop me. I'm uncancelable because I believe in the words that I'm saying with conviction.
right.
And I think that if you can get to that place in your life and recognize, like, not everybody's going to like you, it's
Mm-hmm.
fine.
Yeah, who
The
cares?
most important thing is when you stand in front of that mirror that you like you, that you hold your truth, that it's self evident that you are created to be the person you are. And that if you're willing to stand in that truth, it's incredible what happens. Mark, you had the same experience. You had a decision to make
Mm-hmm.
that changed your life forever. And had you not made that decision, we would not be here,
True that.
right? You
Yeah.
would be a CPA, maybe an alcoholic, maybe miserable, having
Mm-hmm.
a midlife crisis, right? Whatever that thing
Mm-hmm.
is, but you stood in front of that sign and you said, yes, this is for me. And you
That's right.
honored that. And that is life.
Yeah.
Honor your truth, even if it's uncomfortable, even if people around you judge you and say you're a crazy person. Dude, when I left that Fortune 10 company, everyone around me said, you're never going to be successful again, man. This is a once in a lifetime shot. You're insane to walk away from this. I mean, I was making more money than people with like PhDs and master's degrees, man.
Mm-hmm.
I come from nothing. And everyone said, you're never going to make it again. And I said to myself, I don't give a shit what you think. I'm going to
Right.
trust and bet on
You're not the
myself.
boss of me. that's
Dude, you got to be a contrarian to some
that's what my
extent.
son. That's what my stepdaughter used to say to Sandy. You're not the boss of me, and she's like, I guess you're right. I still want you to do those things. I love it. Yeah, we got to wrap this up. But one thing you said is just absolutely profound. Is you said truth. You got to face your truth, but it might be uncomfortable. And I would propose that moving toward capital T truth is always uncomfortable
Yes.
because culture doesn't want you to go there. They want you to stay in your little box. But if you want to be happy, you want to fulfill your creative yearning, your spiritual drive, you have to move toward that truth and get comfortable with that discomfort until it becomes joyful. I really appreciate you, Michael. What a brilliant interview you are, and it's so cool to hear your story and what an inspiration you are for everybody, not just people who've gone through that extreme trauma like you have and are looking for answers, but for everybody. Because if you can do it, if you can do it, then anybody can do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
And it's an honor to be here with you. And, again, I have so much admiration for you because even from a million miles away, you played a role in this journey just by being willing to share your truth.
that's
So I
cool.
thank you, my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can people find more about you? Where do you want to, folks to kind of engage or connect with you?
Yeah, I'm everywhere at Michael Unbroken on social.
Mm-hmm.
You can check out the Think Unbroken podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and you can also read my first book absolutely for free. If you go
Oh,
to
cool.
book.thinkunbroken.com, you can download it. It's $0. If you want to buy a copy, go for it. I literally don't care. My mission is to end generational trauma in my lifetime through education and information. So
That's
that's where you
cool.
can find me.
So, well, I'll talk to you about that offline. Hang on. So thinkunbroken.com and Michael Unbroken on social media. Yeah, awesome. I look forward to being on your podcast too. I think we'll record that next.
Yeah, it's going to be
And
amazing.
it'll be a fun conversation. And appreciate all you do. And again, reach out if I can help out with anything, and we'll let you know when this is going to go live.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, hoo-yah.